After I had heart surgery, my son's wife said, "Your health is your problem. We still need the house payments." I nodded and signed the papers they wanted. 30 days later, the bank called them. They never saw it coming. Family story. I was still in the hospital gown when Vanessa walked into the recovery room with that look on her face. The one she always wore when she wanted something and already knew she was going to get it. My chest still burned from the incision. The nurses had me on oxygen, and every breath felt like somebody was sitting on my ribs. Derek, my only son, stood behind her holding a folder like it was nothing more than a takeout menu. I had just come through a triple bypass. 3 days earlier, the surgeon told me if I had waited another week, I would not have made it to the operating table. My heart had been working on borrowed time for months, and I finally gave in and let them open me up. I thought maybe, just maybe, the people who called themselves my family would show a little patience while I tried to stay alive. Vanessa did not sit down. She stood at the foot of the bed and spoke like she was reading a grocery list. "Your health is your problem, Walter. We still need the house payments. The mortgage is due in 11 days and the bank does not care that you almost died. Derek and I have been covering things long enough. It's time you put the house in our names so we can refinance and keep the roof over everyone's heads." Derek would not meet my eyes. He just nodded like a boy who had already agreed to whatever his wife decided. I looked at the folder in his hands. Inside were quitclaim forms, already filled out with my full legal name, the address of the 3-bedroom ranch in Maple Grove, and the legal description of the property. The same house I had paid on for 26 years. The same house where I raised Derek after his mother left. The same house where I planted the maple tree in the front yard the week he was born. I was tired. The pain medicine made the edges of the room soft. Vanessa kept talking about how the payments would continue, how they would take care of everything, how I could stay in the guest room as long as I needed. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I signed every page they put in front of me. My hand shook, but the signature was still mine. The nurse walked in while I was finishing the last page and asked if everything was all right. I told her yes. Vanessa smiled at the nurse like we were the picture of a caring family. They left with the papers that afternoon. I stayed in the hospital another 4 days. When they finally discharged me, Derek picked me up in his truck and drove me home in silence. The house looked the same from the outside, but something already felt different. Vanessa had moved most of my clothes into the small bedroom at the back of the house. My recliner was still in the living room, but the television remote was gone and a new sound bar sat under the screen. She had already started making the place hers. I recovered slowly. Walking to the mailbox took everything I had for the first 2 weeks. Vanessa made sure the refrigerator stayed stocked with the soft foods the doctor recommended, but she never asked how I was feeling beyond a quick "you doing okay today" that did not wait for an answer. Derek went back to his job at the logistics warehouse and came home tired. Most evenings they ate in the kitchen while I sat in the living room with a tray. The mortgage statement still came in my name for a short time, then they stopped. Vanessa had already filed the new deed. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply waited. On the 15th day after I signed those papers, I made a quiet phone call from the backyard while they were both at work. I called the bank that held the mortgage. I identified myself, gave them the loan number, and told them the house had been transferred. I asked what would happen to the loan now that the deed was in new names. The woman on the other end was polite and clear. The mortgage still existed. Transfer of the property did not erase the debt. If the new owners did not continue the payments, the loan would go into default the same as it always would. She asked if I wanted to remain a co-borrower. I told her no. I asked her to update the contact information to Derek and Vanessa's numbers, which were already listed as emergency contacts on the old account. She said she would process the change. I hung up and sat on the old wooden bench under the maple tree. The leaves were just starting to turn. I thought about the years I had spent making those payments alone after Derek's mother left. I thought about the overtime shifts, the second jobs, the nights I ate cereal for dinner so the mortgage would clear. I thought about the way Vanessa had looked at me in the hospital like I was already a problem that needed solving. I did not tell them about the call. The next 2 weeks passed in the same quiet pattern. Vanessa cooked. Derek worked. I walked a little farther each day. My strength was coming back slower than I wanted, but it was coming. One evening Vanessa mentioned that the refinance paperwork was moving along. She said the rates looked good and they might even be able to pull some cash out for necessary updates. She looked at the kitchen cabinets while she said it. I nodded and kept eating my soup. On the 30th day after I signed the papers, the phone rang at 9:14 in the morning. I was in the backyard watering the small garden I still managed to keep. Through the open kitchen window I heard Vanessa answer. Her voice started normal, then climbed. What do you mean past due? We just... No, the house is in our name now. There has to be a mistake. I set the hose down and walked inside slowly. Derek was still at work. Vanessa stood in the middle of the kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear, face pale. She looked at me once, then turned away. Yes, I understand the payment was due on the 1st. No, we did not receive a statement. The mail. Yes. How much? That can't be right. She listened for a long time. When she finally hung up, she stared at the counter for almost a full minute before she spoke. The bank says the mortgage is 30 days past due. They said the loan was never assumed by us. They said the payment stopped the month after the deed transfer and now they're calling the numbers on file. They're calling us. I sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where Derek used to do his homework when he was small. I thought the refinance would take care of it, she said. Her voice had lost the sharp edge it usually carried. They said if we don't bring it current in 14 days, they start the formal default process. I looked at her. You said my health was my problem. You said you still needed the house payments. You wanted the papers signed. They're signed. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. We were going to refinance. We were going to handle it. You were supposed to keep paying until everything went through. I never said I would. The silence that followed felt heavier than the oxygen mask they had strapped to my face in the hospital. Vanessa walked out of the kitchen and into the bedroom she now shared with my son. I heard the door close harder than necessary. Derek came home that evening to a different house than the one he left that morning. Vanessa told him everything in a rush of words while I sat in my recliner and listened. He looked at me the way he used to look when he was 12 and had broken something he could not fix. Dad, why didn't you say something? You both came to the hospital with papers already filled out. You told me what needed to happen. I signed. That was the agreement. He sat down hard on the couch. We can't afford this mortgage on our own. Not with the rates and not with what we already owe on the credit cards. I did not answer. There was nothing left to say that would change the numbers. Over the next 2 weeks the bank called every other day. Vanessa stopped answering after the third call. Notices began arriving in the mail, first polite, then firm. The refinance they had counted on fell apart the moment the lenders saw the recent transfer and the missed payment. No bank wanted to refinance a loan already in early default with new owners who had no payment history on the property. I kept recovering. I walked the neighborhood in the early mornings when the air was still cool. I talked to the neighbor across the street about the HOA rules on fence height. I made my own coffee again. Vanessa and Derek spoke in low voices behind closed doors. Once I overheard her tell him they might have to sell. Derek said nobody would buy a house with a mortgage already in trouble and a recent ownership change that looked suspicious. On a Tuesday morning in late October, I packed a single suitcase. My clothes, my medication, the old photo album that still had pictures of Derek as a boy. I left the rest. Vanessa was at the grocery store. Derek was at work. I locked the front door behind me and walked to the end of the driveway where the rideshare car was waiting. I did not leave a note. The bank statements would keep coming. The calls would keep coming. The house that had been mine for 26 years was no longer my problem. I had signed the papers they wanted. Everything after that belonged to them. The car pulled away from the curb. In the side mirror, I watched the maple tree grow smaller until the street curved and it disappeared. My chest still ached when I breathed too deep, but the weight that had sat on me since the hospital was lighter than it had been in a long time.